So there's been so much conversation the past few days around the Waqf Amendment Act, and the question is, how are citizens and voters thinking about what the union government has done? We commissioned C-Voter to do a catty survey for us. This is the political stock exchange. Yashwant Deshmukh, the lead psephologist, C-Voter, joins us to discuss the results. And I just want to tell our viewers that of the sample size, 20% of the respondents are Muslims. Its sample size is about 1,500. This is done in the Hindi-speaking belt. So it's largely in North India, not so much in the South, with a special focus on the impact on the Bihar elections. So there are some questions I'll spend some time, and there are some just to establish the study. I want to welcome our other guests joining us at this time. Rauf Rahim is an senior advocate in the Supreme Court. He joins us. I have Desh Ratan Nigam, again an advocate in the Supreme Court, works very closely with the RSS. I have Rajat Sethi with us on this broadcast, and I have Tasleem Ahmad Rahmani, President of the Muslim Political Council of India. I want to take the first couple of questions. Have you heard the term Waqf before? So just try and establish a baseline. What is the general understanding that people have, or what they think is the understanding they have around what Waqf means, land donated by someone? So amongst the Muslims, quite naturally, 77% say yes, we know what Waqf is. Even others claim, 6 out of 10 claim they've heard of the term Waqf and have some sense of what this means. How familiar are you with the concept of Waqf? So, okay, you've heard the term. What does it mean? Do you understand how this operates? So, obviously, 63% of Muslims say, yeah, of course, we're very familiar with the term. 11% say they're somewhat familiar. Amongst the non-Muslims, 22% say they're very familiar, 1 in 5. 19% say they are somewhat familiar, 32% say they are not very familiar, and 17% say they're not familiar at all. Now, this is crucial before I bring you the operational part of this survey, because amongst 80% of the respondents who you will hear from, the large bulk are saying they are not very familiar or not familiar at all. So about 50% are saying we don't know very much. 19% are saying we know a little bit. Only 1 in 5 of that 80% are saying they're very familiar. So do keep this in mind as you look at the responses to these questions. Let's come to the first question. Do you believe the Waqf Bill is fair? Do you believe the new Waqf law is fair? What do you think of it? Here, 59% of non-Muslims think yes, the new act is fair. Only 6% of Muslims think the new Waqf law is fair. In comparison, 88% of Muslims think no, the Waqf law is not fair, while 22% of non-Muslims say it's not fair. So non-Muslims think, oh, it's fantastic, even though, a large part of that 80% say they don't really know what the concept of Waqf is. And amongst Muslims, 88% say that this is not fair. Yashwant Deshmukh, I'll start with you. I know you're nursing a bad throat, so pardon him if he sounds like Amitabh Bachchan, but broadly, there is a massive disparity along the lines of religion on the issue of the Waqf Bill. The non-Muslims seem to say, yes, this is good that it's going through. This is a fair law from what they've understood. And Muslims say, no, they don't think this is fair.
Exactly, Rahul, and this shows the kind of partisanship in the society we are watching at this point of time. It's not just political, but it is also on the communal and religious lines. Having said that, there are many other questions which we will be discussing in the program as we progress, and you will also realize while looking at those questions. And I am asking, looking at the data myself, Rahul, whether the answers or whether the distrust as the minorities are showing in this poll has anything to do with the institutions or has everything to do with those in power and the way they are proceeding with the bill. So that is an important point, because in many other questions, I also tend to realize that Muslims at large are not really completely averse to the idea of openness and more transparency, but it's the implementation part somehow, the way it is being done, it is being carried out, the way it is being debated. That is something which is carrying the way. It's more of a narrative setting, and which is very evident how the narrative is set among the non-Muslims.
Let Desh Ratan Nigam respond to this. The fact that only 6% of Muslims think this bill is fair, 88% think it's not fair. It's been pushed through, the government has the numbers, it's now a law. But the fact that the people most directly impacted in large percentage think that this bill is not fair. Is that really reflective of the inability to win over public sentiment amongst those most impacted by the new act?
Well, Rahul, in fact, there was a protest in Delhi, and a lot of social media people and the mainstream channels also went there. And they were surveying people, asking questions. And there, 99% of the people didn't know what Waqf is. So the problem out here is not about what Waqf is or not, it's the perception that is going around the people. So what is actually happening on the ground is certain kind of leaders who are spreading, all kinds of rumors among them, are creating some kind of perception, because that is all politically motivated. Here, nobody has touched the Waqf. Waqf will have Waqifs and Mutawallis who will be followers of Islam. Therefore, only its impact, that is the judicial aspect, is secular. In India, which is governed by constitution, the judicial system in India at all levels is secular. So the judicial system, as Amit Shah also pointed out during his speech in the parliament, Kiran Rijiju also, the grievance mechanism that is there, that is there, is secular. So there is nothing wrong in it. So that perception that people are creating, and if you scratch this 88% that you're showing, I'm 100% sure, as it was done in the past, they do not know anything about Waqf. It's the perception that...
No, so let Rauf Rahim respond to this, because you've looked at this, Mr. Rahim, more from a legal perspective and you have your reservations about it. Deshrata Nigam makes the fact that the overall understanding of the nuances of the law in the general public, Muslim and non-Muslim, is limited. Therefore, it is more about the political narrative, the messaging, and how people perceive and decode the actions of the government, whether they trust that or not, rather than what they actually understand of the nuances of the bill.
See, the important thing is, let's not mix politics with the bill. There's no point. We have to analyze the bill as literate people. Those who can't understand the bill, there's no point going to them. The Sachar committee came up and said that the Muslim community is now in a very bad state. So insofar as education, etc. is concerned. So let's not ask them who don't know about the bill. Let's take the literate Muslim who would stand up and say and analyze as to what are the nuances in the bill and why the need for amendment. The important thing is why the need for amendment. The judicial redressal, being secular, is not something new. Judicial redressal is always secular. You can't say that judicial redressal is not secular in this country. So what has to be firstly seen is the amendments which have come forward. On a one-to-one basis, one should sit down and analyze as to what was there in the 1995 Act, what came by way of amendment in the 2013 Amending Act, and what is new and so very pervasive that hits the Muslim community as a whole. That has to be analyzed. The legislature in its wisdom framed the 1954 Act, then came the 1984 Act, which after the 54 Act, there were 3 amendments. Then the 1995 Act came, which covered the entire country. Previously, Bengal and Uttar Pradesh had their own Waqf laws. And then came the 2013 amendment. Now the legislature in its wisdom incorporated certain salient features in the 2013 amendment, which according to me, if they had been worked, even if they had been worked halfway, though no need would have come for the present amendment. There would have been no need. And I say no need for one reason, is that I am a PIL petitioner in the Supreme Court. I myself said that there has been no survey process going on. And all the states have come up in unison and said there has been no survey in terms of the Amending Act. All the states are on affidavit. So at a stage, if there is no survey, the most fundamental thing is not happening, which is the properties are not surveyed. Then the chance of encroachment increases.
Sure.
So if the chance of encroachment increases, it gives birth to a number of litigations. So today, what was very, very, and I say very, very simple, has been just made into a mounting problem. I don't see any reason why these amendments have come in and why And I say again, why the 2000 amendments were not carried forward for 12 years. There has been no effort at all for last 12 years.
So that's an important point you make, that we should have first tried to implement the law as it stood earlier, rather than trying to, and you're raising questions about the need for the new law. Is the new Waqf law targeting the Muslim community? Let's take a look at the responses to this question. Overall, 31% say yes, it targets the Muslim community, but let's look at the Muslims. 87% feel targeted. Those are big numbers. 22% of the non-Muslims say that the Muslims are being targeted. I want to put that question to Rajat Sethi. Rajat, 87% of the Muslims say they are being targeted. 88% think the new law is not fair. Now that is, and you understand statistics, that is like a very high percentage of people who don't feel comfortable, who are most impacted by what the government has done. They don't think it's the right thing to do.
So, Rahul, I think this is clearly the pitfall of having serious public policy related questions being asked with common man on the street. You know, none of these people go by those actual documents, actual papers, and read the clauses, because, you know, it's hard to even expect them. It is up to the leaders, their representatives sitting in the parliament and discussing. Look at them. They were supposed to talk clause by clause and possibly propose certain amendments, etc. But look at typical Imran Pratap Ghari. What does he say? His opening line, he went on to make a 15-minute speech full of rhetoric, very little on content. He said that Maulana Abul Kalam Azad ki mazar hai, wahan par wo so rahe hain, wo mazar bhi ukhad di jayegi, wo bhi chala jaye. You know, all of these rhetoric tends to sit, minus all the core contents which you can debate and have a healthy discussion around. This fear psychosis is clearly reflected in these numbers. These numbers are such because very, very few people understand. 99% of them would never enter into any cross paths of Waqf in their entire life, but they will have an opinion on it. It is primarily because these are polls, and you want the entire community to pick one poll and just associate everything, your entire rationality, you just bestow it on those polls.
Okay, let Tasneem Rahmani respond. You're making an important point, because if you see, sir, what happened post the Triple Talaq Bill, for example, you know, such a hullabaloo created about how this would be very problematic for the Muslim community. In the end, you know, there hasn't been that much of a problem, frankly, except those who may have tried to do a triple talaq, which in any case is wrong. Or even take the Citizenship Amendment Act, where again, so much of a fear psychosis was created. Rajat has a strong point. A lot of this fear misnomers that people in the Muslim community have is because the leaders of the community, or at least a section of the leaders of the community, have spread that fear. And there are two very important cases, the CAA and the second triple talaq law, where things haven't panned out the way community elders said they would.
See, Rahul, we are living in a secular country, pursuing a secular constitution. I am guaranteed by my constitution that I will live within my religious environment. I will maintain my religious institution, education institution, and my properties. And that's why the government becomes the custodian of my rights. And we must have to respect and honor that custody of the government of India and its supremacy and its right to amend the bills and the laws related to any community of the country, but with their own opinions. So everybody becomes, every sect or the religious identity or any entity which has a separate identification, they become the stakeholders. So why don't if I don't want such a kind of an amendment, then why the government is so very much inclined to do the very much, even if I like it or not. So being a stakeholder, at least my opinion must be respected. And we are not frightening the community at all. We have the substances. And I agree with my previous panelists that there are people inside the parliament, certainly, which are not talking on the facts and the contents of this bill. Even the opposition benches, I don't appreciate the whole debate, the 26-hour debate in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, where the opposition benches has tried to condemn this bill, but they were not, they were just like, they were speaking like an election public meeting. Those were not on the facts. The same way the Treasury benches, whatever they said, they tried to create a public perception through their parliamentary speeches. Bulk of those speeches were a plethora of misinformation produced by the WhatsApp university, and they have been authenticated.
You make an important point: the absence of nuance, the absence of detailing, and the focus more on political rhetoric and narrative building. I want to take two more questions. Is the new Waqf law part of the BJP's broader Hindutva agenda? When this question was asked, let's take a look at the responses. 82% of the Muslims say yes, this is part of BJP's broader Hindutva agenda. 34% of the non-Muslims say yes. 46% of non-Muslims say no, and only 5% of non-Muslims. So the level of polarization or unanimity of opinion amongst the Muslim community on these questions in this see-voter poll very high. I want to take the next question. Will the new Waqf law benefit the Muslim community? When this question was asked, 8% of the Muslims and 52% of the others said yes. Only 8% of the Muslims saying yes, 87% saying no, 22% of the others say no. But 87%, again, Yashwant, it comes back to this. And if you compare the proportion, the percentage of people having reservations with this new law, especially those most impacted, you don't usually in polling get to see high 80s as a percentage, which means that virtually the entire community is unanimous in its opinion that this is bad news.
Rahul, it's what Rajat said and what Taslim Bhai said, actually, they are covering part of this data sentiment in a way which tells us that this has become more of an issue of narrative rather than the content. Yes, the Muslim leaders in and outside the parliament have been making it an issue mostly about the community and the identity crisis rather than the comment. But at the same time, we have to appreciate the fact that even the BJP leaders on the floor and outside the floor are really not making any conciliatory kind of thing or issue-based approach on that. A lot of those statements on the floor and outside the floor have been also on the polarizing lines. So one can't really blame for the minorities to have a doubt on the intent of the government. So problem with this entire thing, I totally agree with what Rajat is saying. Public at large doesn't really know the finer details of the bills, but at the end of the day, Rajat, everything is a narrative, war of narrative, and it is very clearly that the narrative in one side is very, very contrasting opinion on the other side.
And that's a very big problem, Rajat. No matter what it is, and you said it's a lot of rhetoric building, but ultimately that's what politics is about. And here, if the question is, has the government been able to win over those most impacted by the law, then all these responses taken together and aggregate would say a resounding no. That's the reality. That's what the numbers suggest.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think no bill should necessarily be looked at from the perspective, is it trying to please a community or not? That's the wrong objective. Here, it was trying to correct a wrong which was patently in those specific act which was now repealed. It was because it was against natural justice. So government was trying to correct that wrong and only that wrong. And let me tell you, Waqf remains a statutory body. It is not a religious body as such. And I think this is where, all of these conversations would be debated on the floor of the Supreme Court also. A lot of these lawyers will go out and debate that. But the moot point remains that both the Treasury bench and the opposition bench should not have sensationalized a serious public policy concern. And the Treasury bench should also have spokespersons. A minority affairs ministry should have a spokesperson in Hindi or in any other language should actually read out the bill. Put out your perspective in as clear terms as possible, that at least the learned folks in the Muslim community can read it and at least then make a more nuanced perspective or know-how about that bill. Right now, the perception is, aapne meri Eidgah le li, aapne meri kabrgah le li. This is that one-line message which has gone in. This is the elevator pitch of Waqf Bill to the Muslim community.
Let Rauf Rahim respond to this, because while in your first answer, you focused more on the legality of this. Respond, sir, if you can, as best as you can, to Rajat Sethi's argument that in the manner in which the messaging has been communicated to the Muslim community, there's a lot of hyperbole, exaggeration about the impact this will have, suggesting that qabrs are being stolen and snatched away, which is not the fact, and that this is, you know, WhatsApp University on steroids.
So the first thing is that the rhetorics which are in Parliament have been throughout. I in fact was before the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and there also I found that members were at each other's throats. So it was before the Joint Parliamentary Committee also, unfortunately, things were not so good as to have a dialogue on law, which I tried my best to put it across. A part. If somebody like Mr. Imran goes on a rhetoric and doesn't explain the nuances of the law, doesn't mean that Mr. Owaisi didn't do it. He raised very pertinent questions of law, and those are very, very pertinent questions of law. And what you said, that targeting the Muslims, see, no bill will target a particular community. One should not at least say so. The target has been to the Waqifs. Waqifs are those persons who are now lying in their graves. They, at a point of time, they in fact dedicated. The word is dedicated. They dedicated what they wanted and what they could to benefit for 3 reasons which are in the Act. Now, when you say targeting the Muslims, the exact word would have been targeting the Waqifs. I say this for at least 3 reasons. One would be that earlier there was a Limitation Act which was not made applicable to the Waqf Act. Today, one has to sit and analyze as to why and what are the reasons why the Limitation Act is being made applicable. And the only reason I saw from the Honorable the Minority Minister, he said, was to cut down litigation. Now, if you want to cut down litigation, the first and the foremost important thing was to ensure that there are a number of tribunals created, because they are the starting point of any litigation. The High Courts could be a starting point. There is no bar to approach the High Court under Article 226, but the tribunals are the starting point. Tribunals have not been formed. In Gujarat, there was no tribunal for 1.5 years. The Supreme Court came up in a recent judgment and said, now eviction matters will also go before tribunals. So in a state, two or three people, they man the tribunals. They are woefully short of manpower. In each state, there should have been at least 5 to 10. In the entire state of Uttar Pradesh, there's 1 tribunal. Why? If you wanted to do something and to solve and to ensure that litigation comes at base level, then you put in more tribunals. But they did not. They removed the Limitation Act. One has to see why and what was the reason as to why the Limitation Act was not made applicable and made applicable now. And this will, the only thing which will happen is that the effect would be that Waqf properties can be lost. One has to remember that once a Waqf is created, it is for all times to come. There cannot be a limitation on a Waqf Act. And there was no reason given. Apart from that, an important factor was, and this is a purely legal argument again, there was an overriding effect that the Waqf law will prevail over all other laws. Why has this been removed? So these are the things which should have been deliberated. Mr. Owaisi tried his best, but unfortunately, as Parliament does function at times, it was all lost on rhetorics from both sides, or 3 sides or 5 sides or whatever. So a healthy debate has not taken place.
Okay.
In fact, I would say a healthy debate has not taken place.
I want to come now to the political dimension of this, because the most immediate electoral validation of the law is in Bihar, where obviously the Muslim community never really in large numbers voted for the BJP, but they did vote for Nitish Kumar to some extent and in some numbers, even when he was with the BJP as part of the NDA. So does that change? Does that not change? So when Yashwant's team posed this question, let's see the responses to this. Will the Waqf Rao influence voting behavior in the upcoming Bihar elections? 71% of the Muslims say yes, 43% of non-Muslims say yes, 13% of the non-Muslims say no, of the Muslims say no, and 35% of the non-Muslims say no. But basically the big thing to look out there is 43% of non-Muslims also think this will influence voting behavior in the Bihar elections, and 71% of the Muslims think it'll impact voting behavior. But when I see something like that, Yashwant, I also think of the possibility of a counter-polarization. So let's assume that the possibility of polarization of Muslims in favor of the Mahagathbandhan is higher than it usually is. It's already in the mid-70s, but even if, let's imagine, it's higher and JDU candidates lose some votes, it can lead to a potential counter-consolidation which would be to the benefit of the NDA.
Yes, absolutely, Rahul. And there is a misconception about how much Muslim vote actually goes to the NDA. The fact is, only the JDU candidates in Bihar used to get those Pasmanda votes, not really the BJP candidates. So even if it goes for a further polarization, Rahul, I don't see BJP getting affected by that. It's the JDU which will be largely getting affected by that. Maybe slightly a little bit the Paswan candidates, but not beyond that. And you are correct that politically speaking, the counter-polarization is what is going to benefit the BJP more, because it's the my sentiment, the Muslim Yadav consolidation has always been there. I don't think that is going to, dilute or further polarize it in any way. What BJP is not bothered is how many Pasmanda Muslims are voting for JDU. I think BJP's political game plan has more bothered about how to counter-polarize the rest of the stuff and go ahead with that.
Okay. Deshrata Nigam, the fact that 71% of the Muslims think this will impact voter behavior in Bihar, how do you look at that? And the fact that 43% of non-Muslims also think this will impact voter behavior in Bihar.
Well, Rahul, if with your permission, there were certain legal questions that were raised. If you permit me, I'll answer that and then come to...
Go on.
Yes. The fact remains, we are in a constitutional democracy where bills are passed through discussions in parliament. You don't go on every issue to have a referendum with the people and then come back. There was discussions, there were suggestions taken, it was sent to joint parliamentary committee, then discussions were held within the parliament. If the opposition was underprepared, it is their fault. They were certainly highly underprepared, they had nothing to say on merits. Secondly, something called limitation. Limitation is an aspect all over the world. Limitation is an aspect of the judicial process. Otherwise, for all times to come, a dispute would remain open. You sleep over the period of time, come after 50 years, you say, yes, start litigating. Therefore, take any act anywhere in the world, passed by parliament or Congress in the US, there is a limitation clause, and therefore, similarly, in this particular act, which was an anomaly earlier, this limitation has been brought in. So now let me come down to your political question. Yes, we are living in competitive politics. The NDA is competing with the Mahagathbandhan. So they will come with their own plans and schemes. Similarly, apart from correcting the, judicial wrong that has taken place, something which was not permitted in Islam, the Waqf by user, grabbing the land just because you have occupied it and used it for some time, and then you say you have dedicated it. And Amit Shah clearly pointed out, you can only donate what is your own property. You cannot, grab somebody's land. And that was taking place. Standard operating procedure was happening. The public lands were being taken, the private lands. Even a lot of Muslims were very, dissatisfied, and they came out openly in support of this particular act and the amendments that have taken place. So this competitive politics, which certainly, this one-upmanship will take place. Yes, it redressed a wrong that was going on the ground, and it will politically benefit the party, and the Hindutva question will also come in, because here the Muslims probably are considering it only on the religious lines, not political lines. Please understand, and they are, polarizing itself. As you rightly pointed out, the counter-polarization will take place.
No, but Rajat, is that part of the BJP's calculus, pushing this through the Bihar elections? कि वो तो हमारा वोट है ही नहीं, उसको होने दो consolidate, हम अपना वोट पक्का करते हैं. That there will be a counter consolidation.
See, Waqf was always their promise that they will deal with it. So they've already gone to the people on this issue, and they're only implementing their promises.
Let Rajat respond to this. Rajat.
So I think, Rahul, Bihar elections are still good 6 months away, and no party has the wherewithal to carry one issue all through for the next 4 or 5 months. So I don't think it should be seen in isolation. This is a core promise. These are core promises, ideological promises of the BJP, which it has stood by, and it has been a signature sort of a bill. Even UCC, for instance, remains a signature ideological issue of the BJP, and it should not be seen through the lenses of elections alone. BJP has its different machinery which takes care of election, which doesn't necessarily sort of mix with the policies, central core ideas of that the BJP holds very dear.
Okay, I want to come to the next question. Which party stands to gain the most from the Waqf Bill controversy in Bihar? So let's take a look at the responses, and this is divided again by community. 29% of the Muslims think the BJP is the one who gains. 15% of Muslims thinks the RJD gains. 26% think that the Congress is the gainer. JDU is the gainer, is only 5%. So it's net disadvantage JDU. Amongst non-Muslims, 43% say the BJP is the gainer, 15% say the RJD is the gainer, 14% say the Congress is the gainer, JDU is 3%. So basically, Taslim Rahmani, it seems amongst the large percentage of non-Muslims, they seem to think the BJP is the big gainer, and it could be net advantage to the BJP in terms of how this plays out from now till the actual elections.
You see, Rahul, I feel the sole gainer of this act now is going to be the Nitish Kumar.
Why?
Everybody knows that in 2020 assembly election, in 2024, listen me, 2024 parliamentary election, BJP has tried its level best to dismantle and sideline Nitish Kumar, but they could not. But now, the Nitish Kumar will become a very, very pertinent position he will hold, that the BJP itself will try that the Nitish Kumar lives in the political arena of Bihar. Otherwise, if Nitish Kumar loses the Bihar and his strength, his political strength is diminished in Bihar, the central government will be affected after the election, or the JDU will split.
No, but I'm not sure. I want to put Yashwant Deshmukh the same question. The logic could be counterintuitive to what you're saying. The logic can be that Nitish is the only real loser from the Waqf Bill, that whatever percentage of Muslim votes amongst the Pasmandas he may have otherwise got may now switch over. The BJP still, even the data suggests, this is the big gainer. The only one who stands to lose whatever little percentage of Muslim votes he has may potentially be Nitish Kumar. That's what your data is suggesting.
Rahul, and our Bihar tracker has been consistently showing the drop in fortune of the Nitish Kumar numbers, and this is only going to, accelerate the disintegration of that. Whatever the smaller number of Muslims that he was getting, I think that will be in doubt, that will be problematic. The gainer, if you look at it that way, almost like 31% of the electorate are saying Congress and RJD alliance is going to be the gainer, So it is showing us the further polarization of the Bihar side of electorate, and I don't think JDU is going to gain anything out of it. It is only going to accelerate its decline.
Okay, let's come to the next question. How much do you trust the Waqf board? Let's take that question. Do people trust the Waqf board? And here, I'm interested in seeing what Muslims particularly think of whether they trust the Waqf board. How much trust do you have in the Waqf board as an institution? Remember, 13% of the Muslims say they have no trust at all, 12% say they have very little trust, 10% say they have some trust, 59%, which is 6 out of 10, say they have a lot of trust in the Waqf institution. Amongst the others, obviously, 1/4 say they have a lot of trust. That's quite a high percentage. Some is 15%, very little is 17%, none is 26%. So this is a mixed bag. Whereas here, and it's interesting, Yashwant Deshmukh, that no matter what you and I may think of the Waqfs in terms of how they operate and whether they act as the land mafia, amongst those whose land they take care of, or amongst the Muslim community that is most directly impacted, 59% say they have a lot of trust in the Waqf as an institution.
Absolutely, but the number comes wrong, from the 87 to the 60s. And then there is a very interesting question whether they are asking for transparency further in the Waqf or not. That is something which is very different, Rahul. I would really like you to show that it is possible. because that shows that it's not about the content, it's more about the narrative. If done well, even probably a sizable section of Muslims would have probably agreed for a more transparent path.
So I want to take now what I think is the most consequential question of this survey that Sea Voter has done. And this is to do with, should there be more transparency in how Waqf properties are managed? Now just forget for a moment what the non-Muslims think. Look at the percentage of Muslims who think that there is a need for greater transparency in how Waqf properties are managed. 46%, almost half the Muslim respondents in this poll say that there is a need for greater transparency in how Waqf properties are managed. Taslim Rahmani, you know, that is a damning indictment of what people within the community think of the level of transparency with which the Waqf board operates.
You see, Rahul, if you ask me this question that whether I trust on Waqf or not, my answer would be in negative. And as far as the transparency is concerned, even the 46 is a less number. If I go for this kind of a survey, they will tell me, 80% people will tell me that yes, we need more transparency. All this is very true, that we know that this is a corrupt institution, so many mismanagement is over there. We need that kind of amendment in the parliamentary law. It's all true. But when somebody has demanded in the parliament that the minister concerned shall come out with the statistics of the JPC approaches, how many people were in favor of this bill and how many are against this bill? But those statistics were not given. And how we are effecting that two things, legal part, I tried to read this bill for 3 times because I'm not a legal person and it's a very difficult legal language. Why the government is not intending in the tribal areas to give the liberty of tribal Muslims, which are scheduled tribes, to do away, to go with the Waqf properties and doing dedication and maintain. Manipur is a big Waqf property. Tripura, there are big Waqf properties. Assam, then the Lakshadweep. Then why you don't want in the tribal areas for the Muslims to maintain their awqaf or do more dedications in those areas?
Okay, let Rauf Rahim respond before I finish. The fact that half the respondents, almost half the respondents, think there is a need for greater transparency in how these Waqf boards operate, which suggests that even within the community, the percentage of people who are not comfortable with Waqf operations is very high. Mr. Rahim?
Yes, I think what Mr. Taslim Rahmani said is correct, that to trust the Waqf board would be a fallacy. Definitely a part of it, and transparency is not something which is likened to the Waqf board. Two things are definite, but it doesn't mean that the new act is correct. See, if you identify corruption and you identify people who are corrupt, then Section 101 deemed all such persons to be public servants. Where has there been a single instance where a particular person from a Waqf board has been put in for criminal conspiracy? Not a single instance. And one more important thing is to be remembered is that the Waqf board functions under a ministry, and the ministry is the Ministry of Minority Affairs, A. And if you find A, that there is no trust, there's a trust deficit between members of the Waqf board, A, and there is no transparency, then the state government under Section 99 has the power to supersede the board. So you can't just blame the board and not blame the state government.
I think you made some important points. The fact that you already have an act, to what extent has that been implemented? Current existing provisions for penalties and for reprimand, what's been done? Secondly, why ram it through? How much of it is political and how much of it is messaging? So we've had a very nuanced debate. This is a complex issue, and I think Yashwant's data really captures how Muslims and non-Muslims feel about it. So I want to thank him for doing this for us, and I want to thank all our guests for joining us.